Hi everyone. So for your bonus project, we're going to get into kind of a traditional Japanese Chinese ink wash style painting. The first thing you're going to need is not a pen. You don't need a pen, a pencil, anything like that. You do want some kind of watercolor paper or mixed media. You're going to want some water. And basically what's going to end up happening is something similar to doing a watercolor painting. But we're going to use acrylic wash. So that's what's inside this gross looking jar here. I've taken just a little bit of black paint and pushed it into a jar full of a whole bunch of water, and you can see how it runs really thin, almost like ink. Now, traditionally, this would have been done with ink. If you have India ink at home, feel free to use that instead. But seeing as we have a whole bunch of acrylic paint, we're going to stick with that. So we can kind of make an approximation. And the more water that I add, this is just straight water on my brush, the more I can thin down this ink wash until eventually it becomes more and more transparent. And I can start to get something that's equivalent to like a soft gradient. So you aren't going to use white paint. Instead, you're using water to thin down your black paint. The way that I'm going to do this here is more of a traditional kind of watercolor technique. And to do this, I'm going to start with a very watered down paint. So almost entirely water the smallest amount of this black ink wash that I created. And again, I just made that by mixing black paint into a jar of water, just a little tiny bit of black paint. And so I'm just kind of watering down my canvas here. I'm going to paint wet on wet. So my wet paint is going onto a wet canvas. You can also paint wet on dry, so wet paint onto a dry canvas. That's going to give you a slightly different look. I'm also going to use these little trays that I have. I just had these lying around, but you could use a palette at home or really just anything you have lying around. It all cleans up just fine. So I'm going to apply a little bit of water, and then I'll put a little bit of my black paint here to thin it down even more. And I'll do the same. I'm going to mix up 2 or 3 different values, kind of a medium black, a lighter black, and I'm going to make an even lighter black as well. And all I'm doing is adding more and more water inside of it. That's all I'm doing. The more water, the lighter it becomes, almost like a stain, as opposed to a thick, goopy acrylic paint. So there's all 3 of my values. I'm going to start with the lightest value and just kind of rough in kind of what I want to paint. So for mine, I think I'm going to do like a little traditional kind of American landscape, a little lake with like some pine trees or something very simple. I'm just going to speed this up here, and we'll see what we can come up with. So as I'm painting, I can also use a paper towel before the paint kind of soaks into the paper. Again, I want to stress, use some watercolor paper or mixed media paper. If you're using printer paper, your printer paper is going to dissolve. It is not made to absorb water like this. So as we're going along, please make sure you're using thick paper. Heck, use cardboard if you have to, but do not use printer paper. Just don't do that. I'm thinking about my light source, right? Something about where's my light coming from. And notice how I'm kind of avoiding areas around my little pine tree here in the front right. And I'm darkening the background around my pine tree on the far right there as well. And that darkening of the background makes those lighter branches stand out that much more. So all I'm doing is really thinking about the front, the back, the highlights, the shadows. That's kind of it. I'm going to let my paint bleed because I like that wet on wet kind of smoky look. If you do not like the smoky kind of bleed that watercolor and that ink washes can do, then absolutely do not do that. Do wet on dry.